Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, those who are here in the Zendo and those who are joining us from home. And the Sangha that reaches around the world that's sitting with us. Mumonkan, Case 29. The Six Patriarchs, Your Mind Moves. The wind was flapping a temple flag, and two monks started an argument. One said, the flag moved. The other said, no, the wind moved. They argued back and forth, but could not reach a conclusion. The sixth ancestor said, it is not the wind that moves. It is not the flag that moves. It is your minds that are moving. The two monks were awestruck. And another koan relevant to our Sesshin practice, Blue Cliff Record, Case 50, Particle After Particle Samadhi. A monk asked Umon, what is particle after particle samadhi? Umon said, rice in the bowl, water in the pail. The first bite of oatmeal, the 20th bite of oatmeal. So I wanted to begin our Rohatsu Sesshin for 2023 to clear up some misconceptions and questions about the Buddha. Was the Buddha a real person? So there are two aspects to real person. I'm not sure that Chozen Roshi is a real person in the usual sense of person. But was there arguments among scholars, was the Buddha a real person? Yes, he was. Although scholars may be debating about this long after we are dead, the consensus is that the person that we call the Buddha lived in the late 400s and early 300s BCE. And there's evidence that he was a contemporary of two Indian kings, Bimbasara, who became a Buddhist under the Buddha, and Anatashatru, and also a contemporary of the founder of the Jain sect, Mahavira. How did the Buddha become enlightened without a koan? Well, the Buddha did have a koan. And the koan was, and is actually our koan, what is the origin of suffering? And once I discover that origin, can I discover a cure? This is one of the reasons the Buddha is called the great physician. What is the origin of the illness that we have been calling COVID? We're still arguing that, right? And what kind of illness did that virus cause beyond the physical illness in this country, around the world? What's the origin of malaria or sickle cell disease or tuberculosis? If we find the origin of a disease, we have a much better chance of discovering a cure. Malaria, can we treat or even cure it? Malaria was long thought to be caused by miasmas or mal-air, bad air from swamps or from contaminated rivers, coming in at the windows at night. And so there were all kinds of precautions about how you slept at night. And it wasn't until the late 18th century that its cause, and then eventually its remedies, were discovered. But despite the fact that we know the cause and we know the cure, malaria still kills about 600,000 people each year. How much suffering does the disease of self kill every year? How much suffering does it cause, and how many people does it kill every year? And what is the root cause of our own suffering? We're all here because we have seen, at least to a certain degree, that the cause of our suffering lies in our own minds. It lies within our mistaken idea of a lonely, defective, unloved, and unlovable self. And our idea that a self is limited to one lifetime. But despite knowing the cause and the cure, the dis-ease we could call self kills hundreds of thousands of people each year, as we are aware is happening right now in Ukraine and in Russia, with all the young men and women that are conscripted into the Russian army. Constricted. Yeah, they are constricted. And in Israel and in Gaza and in many places all around this spinning ball of earth and lava and fire and water and air. We are all here seeking a cure for the disease of myself. Everyone, not just us. But we at least have a hint, a trail to follow in discovering how this disease operates and what the cure is. And that trail is the path of our practice. Did the Buddha have teachers? I wrote this because I've had people tell me, well, the Buddha didn't have teachers. I don't need a teacher. Fine. We call that the fox in charge of the hen house. We know of at least 2 teachers that the Buddha had. After he left his home and became an ascetic, he studied under at least 2. First, Alara Kalama at Vesali, who taught the Buddha meditation that culminated in a meditative state called the dhyana, which was called the sphere of nothingness. The sphere of nothingness. And Gautama Buddha studied diligently and eventually equaled his teacher, Alara, who said he couldn't teach him anymore and said, "You are the same as I am now. There's no difference between us. Stay here and take my place and help teach my students with me." After leaving, the Buddha decided he wasn't satisfied and wanted to leave and find another teacher, Uddaka Ramaputta, who taught the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. The Gautama also accomplished this practice, but felt unsatisfied and left again after being asked to stay and teach. Because, quote, "it does not lead to dispassion, to cessation, to calm, to knowledge, to awakening, to nirvana." And he moved on and reportedly then undertook severe ascetic practices. There were an estimated 22 sects of yogic meditation in India at the time that the Buddha was alive, so he may well have had more than 2 teachers. 2,500 years from now, who will know the names of all the teachers that you practiced with? Or the podcast that inspired you to change? But all of those teachers and all of those podcasts that have inspired or comforted you are testimony to the fact that the Buddha is still alive. The Buddha is alive in the bodies and hearts of all of us sitting here at home, here in the Zendo and around the world, working on the very same koan, fundamentally the same koan that drove the Buddha out of his comfortable life and onto the Dharma path. The Majjhima Nikaya mentions that Gautama lived in, quote, remote jungle thickets during his years of spiritual striving and had to overcome the fear that he felt living in the forests. We try a very tame version of this practice in our very tame forest during the grasses and trees Sesshin, when we venture into the forest at night. And it's quite potent because we're so used to living in boxes and driving around in boxes and having very tame gardens. The ascetic techniques were based on the notion that the desires of the body were the hindrance to enlightenment and had to be overcome by methods like fasting or breath control or not bathing. And we actually have a video showing that these practices are alive in India today. There's one that has a man who, as an ascetic practice, held his arm up in the air permanently until his arm became withered and completely stiff, like a trunk of a tree or a limb of a tree. And we do have a record in the Pali Canon of some of the ascetic practices that the Buddha underwent. So the Buddha reasoned that if there was a wet, sappy piece of wood, it would be impossible to light it on fire. He said the person would only reap weariness, disappointment. And the idea was that it was necessary to conquer sensual desire and thirst for sensual pleasure to gain enlightenment. So how to dry out that piece of wood? So this is the Buddha speaking. I thought, suppose with my teeth clenched and my tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, I beat down, constrain, and crush mind with mind. So with my teeth clenched and my tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, I beat down, constrained, and crushed mind with mind. While I did so, sweat ran from my armpits. Just as a strong person might seize a weaker person by the head or shoulder and beat them down, constrain them and crush them, so too, with my teeth clenched and my tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, I beat down, constrained, and crushed mind with mind, and sweat ran from my armpits. But although tireless energy was aroused in me, and unremitting mindfulness was established, my body was overwrought and strained because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. That's a very interesting line. He had actually been asked by a student, when painful feelings arise in your mind, not let alone your body, do they remain? And this is the Buddha's answer, no, they don't remain. So that by itself is an amazing practice, an amazing result of practice, that painful feelings from the past or from the present, imagined suffering, and so on, has no place to stick. So then he says, suppose I practice further the breathless meditation. So I stop the in-breath and the out-breath through my nose, mouth, and ears. While I did so, there was a violent burning in my body, just as if two strong men were to seize a weaker man by both arms and hold him over a pit of hot coals. So too, when I stopped the in-breath and out-breath, through my mind, nose, and ears, there was a violent burning in my body. There was a violent burning in my knees, my back. Can all relate to this. But although tireless energy was aroused in me and unremitting mindfulness was established, my body was overwrought and strained because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feelings that arose in me did not invade my mind and remained. Now when some deities saw me, some said, the ascetic Gautama has died. Other deities said, "No, the ascetic Gautama is not dead, but he is dying." And other deities said, "The ascetic Gautama is neither dead nor dying. He is an arhat, and for such is the way that arhats dwell." Looking dead, I guess. I thought, suppose I practice entirely cutting off food. Then the deities came to me and said, "Good sir, do not practice entirely cutting off food. If you do so, we shall infuse heavenly food into the pores of your skin, and this will sustain you." I considered, this is the Buddha speaking, if I claim to be completely fasting while these deities infuse heavenly food into the pores of my skin, and this sustains me, then I shall be lying about fasting. So I dismissed these deities, saying, "There's no need." So the Buddha is contemplating, just like we contemplate. He's contemplating day after day, sitting after sitting. What do I need to do to reach enlightenment? I thought, suppose I take very little food, a handful each time. A bit of bean soup or lentil soup or veg soup or pea soup. So I took very little food, a handful each time, whether bean soup or lentil soup or veg soup or pea soup. While I did so, my body reached a state of extreme emaciation. Because of eating so little, my limbs became like the jointed segments of vine stems or bamboo stems. Because of eating so little, my backside became like a camel's hoof. Because of eating so little, backside meaning his bottom, calloused. Because of eating so little, my backside became like a camel's hoof. Because of eating so little, the projections on my spine stood forth like corded beads. Because of eating so little, my ribs jutted out as gaunt as the crazy rafters of an old roofless barn. Because of eating so little, the gleam of my eyes sank far down in their sockets, looking like the gleam of water that has sunk far down in a deep well. Because of eating so little, my scalp shriveled and withered as a green bitter gourd shrivels and withers in the wind and sun. Because of eating so little, my belly skin adhered to my backbone. Thus, if I touched my belly skin, I encountered my backbone. And if I touched my backbone, I encountered my belly skin. Because of eating so little, if I defecated or urinated, I was so weak I fell over on my face. Because of eating so little, if I tried to ease my body by rubbing my limbs with my hands, the hair, rotted at its roots, fell from my body as I rubbed. I thought, whatever ascetics or Brahmins in the past have experienced painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion, this is the utmost. There is none beyond this. Maybe we've all felt that. We were having a difficult time sitting. Nobody in the whole Zendo is experiencing the pain that I'm experiencing, either mental or physical. So this idea of if I force myself to give up everything I find pleasurable, then I'll get enlightened. We have had people come to Sesshin, not revealing what they were going to do, but they had decided that in 1 week of Sesshin they would give up smoking, give up marijuana and other drugs, alcohol, pornography, and fast on water for a week. And then they would become enlightened. So these ideas persist, right? And then there are many more pages of the austerities that the Buddha underwent, like many months of crawling around on the floor like a dog, not standing, not walking, standing up. By this racking practice of austerities, I have not attained any superhuman distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. Could there be another path to enlightenment? So the Buddha realized all these austerities were fruitless. As Shanae mentioned in her talk, the future Buddha then recalled a time when he was young, and his father brought him to a ceremony, which is the first plowing of the year, It was a festival of the Sakyan clan that they belonged to. And the attendants left this little boy under a tree, a rose apple tree, and went to watch the ceremony. And the boy sat in meditation posture and practiced mindfulness of breathing and spontaneously entered the first jhana. As the Buddha said, I recall when my father, the Sakyan, was occupied while I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, I entered and dwelled in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought and examination, with rapture and happiness born of seclusion. Could this be the path to enlightenment? And then following on that memory, I came to the realization, this is indeed the path to enlightenment. I thought, why am I afraid of that happiness that has nothing to do with sensual pleasures and unwholesome states? So he had discovered another kind of happiness, which I think we all discover in the course of a sesshin. You know, the first few days are rocky, but then we discover this basic kind of happiness. It's part of our original nature. Gagu, I think, called it wonderment. It has that quality too, that everything is wondrous. Everything has its own light. Everything is shining. Sometimes I describe it as the simple happiness that you're thirsty and you get a drink of water. But we're always looking for something much more intense. And so we overlook what's always there. And the Buddha said, I thought, I am not afraid of that happiness that has nothing to do with sensual pleasures and unwholesome states. I considered it is not easy to attain that happiness with a body so excessively emaciated. Suppose I ate some solid food, some boiled rice and porridge. And I ate some solid food, some boiled rice and porridge. Now at that time, 5 monks were waiting upon me, thinking if our ascetic Gautama achieves some higher state, he will inform us. But when I ate the boiled rice and porridge, the 5 monks were disgusted and left me thinking, the ascetic Gautama now lives luxuriously, eating his rice and porridge. He has given up his striving and reverted to luxury. He found a simple happiness. This is such a profound line. He found a simple happiness that is not dependent on anything external. Perhaps you can recall a time when you were a child or more recently, when you found a simple happiness. You entered samadhi like the Buddha did under the rose apple tree. Perhaps when you were squatted down watching ants for an hour. Or when you climbed up in a tree and just were aware as you leaned against the tree of the constant gentle movement of the tree and the leaves. I don't know, but everyone has touched that. Our practice allows us to find the home that dwells within, a home we can access, even when we're hungry, when we're tired, when we're anxious, when we're lonely, when we're grieving, even when we're sick and in pain, even if we get put in jail, like Nelson Mandela. So then when his 5 companions rejected him as living in luxury, he went searching again of what is wholesome, seeking the supreme state of sublime peace. I wandered by stages through the Magadhan country until eventually I arrived at Uruvela, near Sananingama. There I saw an agreeable piece of ground, a delightful grove with a clear flowing river with pleasant smooth banks, and nearby a village for alms resort. I considered, This is an agreeable piece of ground. This is a delightful grove with a clear flowing river with pleasant smooth banks and a nearby village for alms resort. This will serve for the striving of a clansman intent on striving. And I sat down there thinking, this will serve for striving. So here we are in this agreeable piece of ground with delightful groves. Not a river, but a pond. With pleasant banks, a nearby village. A very agreeable place, an ideal place, like the Buddha chose. So to take advantage of this place, this time, the infinite support that's available to us. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous passing away of joy and displeasure, I entered and dwelled in the fourth jhana. So he went through the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana. Each one has certain characteristics. And then he talked about how he had cultivated his mind. And this, I've always loved this because it's an exact description of some of the stages that we go through in a sesshin and some of the work that we need to do. When my mind, so he's sitting down in this grove, when my mind was thus concentrated, so concentration comes first, purified, we can talk about that, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable means like clay, wieldy means it's not so heavy that it weighs you down. You can move it about where you want it to be, rather than where it pulls you. Steady and attain to imperturbability. I directed it to. So when the Buddha attained that state of equanimity of mind and peace of mind, clarity of mind, bright clarity of mind, that's when he brought in the questions that we all have about life, and we can do the same thing. We all have questions that we'd like to go deeper into understanding or get answers to. And the answers are there, but we have to clear our mind of all of the confusion of thoughts and constant selfing. And then drop the question in, just as the Buddha did. And then he had revelations. So the first thing he directed it to was the knowledge of the recollection of past lives. I recollected my many-fold past lives, that is 1 birth, 2 births, etc., 20, 30, 50, 100, 100,000 births, many eons of world contraction, many eons of world expansion, many eons of world contraction and expansion. And he could see, I had a name, I belonged to this clan, this was my food, this is my experience of pleasure and pain, this was my lifespan. And when I passed away from that life, I was reborn as. So he just sat there, you can imagine like a movie of all of these past lives. And some of them are put into interesting tales, the Jataka tales. But he's talking about here about hundreds of thousands of lives and world expansions and world contractions. So it helps to put some of our worries about political division in the country, climate change, and so on, in perspective when we think we are here because of hundreds and thousands of past lives. The chain of cause and effect stretches back eons, maybe before the life of this solar system, and brought us here. He also then looked at the passing and away and rebirth of other beings, how that happened. The destruction of the taints. So the taints are things that under the right conditions can become big problems. So once somebody asked the Buddha, is the baby enlightened, like innately enlightened? Couldn't we just like preserve a child as it grows and keep it from suffering? And then we'd have an enlightened being. And the Buddha said no, because the seeds, the taints, are there, and under the right circumstances, they will grow. So the taint of sensual desire, the taint of ignorance, the taint of aversion, anger, and so on, all there, and eventually lead to suffering. So he was in that beautiful state, which everyone can reach, not in the first or second or even the third day of Sesshin, but once the mind settles and clears, once we become not an individual person with an individual life of being bumped around in the world and all the knotty problems that we suffer with, but just an open, clear mind, then we can drop in a question and wait for an answer to emerge from the river of Prajnaparamita. So just a word about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which I led some this morning, and I'll lead for the next few mornings. So after we do the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is, I think, fundamental to do every morning, and then pick up your method and go forth with your method. And this is from the Sutra on the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was living in the Kuru country where there was a town of the Kurus named Kama Sadama. There he addressed the monks thus, "Monks." "Venerable One," they replied, "the Blessed One said this. This is the one-way path for the purification of beings, for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the passing away of pain and dejection, for the attainment of the true way, for the realization of nirvana, namely, the 4 establishments of mindfulness." So this is the one path. The one path that's been discussed quite a bit. But the contemporary understanding is it's a one-way path, not the one path, like the only path. It's a one-way path that leads to liberation. And I often say that once you really step onto the Dharma path, it's like those moving walkways in the airport. If you're not careful, it's just like, there you go. Can't get off. Oh, you think you can get off for a while. You know, they have those little places where you can get off and have a hot dog or something. And then if you want to get to your gate, you got to keep going. Or sometimes I compare it to when I lived in Malawi, they had fish traps that were woven. So the mouth was about that big, and then it tapered down, and it had little thorns woven into it. And the thorns were pointing towards the end. So you could go forward, the fish could go forward, but it couldn't back up because it would get impaled on the thorns. So you are also in the fish trap of the Dharma. If you try to back up, it will be painful. You have to go forward. So then the Buddha says, what are the 4? Here, monks, a monk dwells contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having subdued longing and dejection in regard to the world. Another translation of those 2 words is having abandoned clinging and grief for the world. Having abandoned clinging to and grief for the world. That is not easy. But the Buddha says this is a requirement if we want to really still the heart mind and go deep. Here, monks, a monk dwells contemplating the body in the body, and there's a commentary on the body in the body. Why do they say that twice? The body in the body. And the footnote says, the repetition contemplating the body in the body has the purpose of precisely determining the object of contemplation and of isolating that object from others with which it might be confused. Thus, in this practice, the body should be contemplated as such, and not one's feelings, ideas, and emotions concerning it. The phrase also means that the body should be contemplated simply as a body, and not as a man, a woman, a self, or a living being. Pretty interesting. The body in the body, within the body, not outside the body. We can keep detecting how we're outside of things as our practice goes on. And discovering that we're outside, then we dissolve the barriers, whatever selfing is keeping us from merging and merge. And then, of course, contemplating mind in mind, feelings as feelings, and so on. Then dwelling, contemplating phenomena in phenomena. So within the phenomena of the body, the mind, and the heart, ardent, clearly comprehending, having longing and dejection in regard to the world, having abandoned longing and dejection in regard to the world. So that can happen daily in our practice, that a worry arises, grief for ourselves, for our family, for the world, or clinging, oh, as soon as I finish meditating, I'm going to order this from Amazon. Then I'll be happy. We can just watch it. Is this clinging? Is this aversion? Is this ignorance? Maybe they're all ignorance. So the era in which the Buddha lived, there was the idea that perfection was the goal, and the holiness of a person was judged by their level of asceticism. But Gautama had a breakthrough when he was sitting on the banks of the river in that beautiful place that he found to sit. And as a boat passed by, he heard a teacher telling a student who was studying how to play the lute that to play beautifully, the strings had to be adjusted so they weren't too loose or too tight. Thereafter, the Buddha taught a middle way between sensual indulgence and severe asceticism. And he actually became a reformer in the widespread Shramana movement. So what can we learn from this? Changing self-soothing habits doesn't happen overnight. It can't be done by force. It occurs naturally as the experience of ourself changes from craving into simple happiness and equanimity. This happiness and equanimity are always accessible. When we change from aversion into clarity, from ignorance into the vow that goes ever deeper and wider in understanding the experiences of our life. And as happened with the Buddha, the lives of other humans and of all living beings and all existences. We chant in the morning, Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Bhagavato means the Blessed One. And you can imagine that we might send blessings to someone who finds a cure for a terrible disease. I remember when Jonas Salk developed the polio vaccine and the Sunday paper was delivered to my grandparents' doorstep. And my mother went out and saw it and began crying. A Blessed One. Arahato means worthy of homage. Samma Sambuddhasa means perfectly self-awakened, but it doesn't mean that we awaken by ourselves. We have to do the work ourselves, practicing our method diligently, and when the moment is right, letting go into pure awareness, falling asleep, noticing, assessing and adjusting the state of our body, heart, and mind, practicing our method diligently, and again and again, tightening the strings, loosening the strings. How privileged we are to have this time, this wide open access to the Dharma and to the Sangha, the billions of teachers outside of and within us, always ready to help unburden us, to enlighten us if we ask for help.